Alright, welcome back everyone for another video. So I just did Genesis and now I am going over to John. So John 10. Okay, so without further ado and without a whole introduction kind of stuff, whatever. So let's just go dive right into reading of John 9. Okay, so this is Jesus heals a man born blind. So he says, as he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said these things, he spit on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. The neighbors who had seen him before as a beggar were saying, is this not the man who used to sit and beg? Some said, it is he. Others said, no, but he is like him. He kept saying, I am the man. So they said to him, then how were your eyes opened? He answered, the man called Jesus made mud and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Good grief, is it always on the Sabbath day when he does this kind of stuff? So the Pharisees asked him how he had received his sight, and he said to them, he put mud on my eyes, and I washed and I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. So they said again to the blind man, what do you say about him since he has opened your eyes? He said, he is a prophet. The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see? His parents answered, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. But how he now sees, we do not know, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. Therefore, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So for the second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered, whether he is a sinner I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have already told you, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? And they reviled him, saying, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he came from, or where he comes from. The man answered, why, this is an amazing thing. You do not know where he comes from, yet he has opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, you were born in utter sin, and would you teach us? And they cast him out. Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and having found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, and who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. He said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Jesus said, For judgment I came into this world, that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard these things and said to him, Are we also blind? Jesus said to them, If you were blind, you would have no guilt. But now that you say, We see, your guilt remains. And that is chapter 9. So I really like this chapter. This is probably one of my favorite. I think I said that about the last one too. But yes, this is one of my favorite. One of my favorite ones too. Alright, so before I get into the actual notes of it, let's go ahead and get into the reflection of chapter 9. It is from... Oh wait, is that... Nope, never mind, ignore me. That was from... No, okay, ignore that again. Okay, the reflection for chapter 9 was on the next page. Okay, so here we go. So this reflection is by Mary A. Kaysen, and it is called Was Blind But Now I See. So the events of John chapter 9 take place right after the Feast of Tabernacles, a week-long festival commemorating the time the Israelites spent in the wilderness. The Jews built and lived in temporary booths during the week. They came to the temple every night carrying oil lamps for the most interesting and entertainment part of the festival, the fire ceremony and torch dance. 4 huge golden menorahs set on bases 50 feet high as the walls of the temple, were ignited in the courtyard. The Levitical magicians played while a circle of young men danced and acrobatically threw flaming torches high into the air. On the last night of the fire ceremony, the scripture readings were all about the light. The people were reminded that God's presence faithfully led them through the wilderness, enthroned in the great pillar of fire. The priests urged them to look forward to the time when the true light, the promised Messiah, the anointed God, would tabernacle with his people and reflect his light to every nation on the earth, or of the earth. It is said that the lights in the temple blazed with such brilliance during the ceremony that all Jerusalem were illuminated. It is in front of the extinguished torches the next morning that Jesus announced, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. John 8:12. As Christ left the temple, he portrayed what happens when the light shines. Some people, like the man born blind, will see, while others, who think they have the sight, will turn away blind. And this was in 9:39 through 41. Okay, the blind man progressed from calling Jesus a prophet, verse 17, to defending him against the Pharisees' accusations, in 25, to inviting them to become Christ's disciples, in 27, and then correcting his doctrine, in verse 34, to confessing Jesus as Lord and worshiping him, in verse 38. The Pharisees, by the way of contrast, remained oblivious to their spiritual blindness. The previous night, they had given their wholeheartedly assent to the scripture. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in the land of darkness, or land of deep darkness, on them who has light shone. This is Isaiah 9:12 or 9:2. But ironically, they couldn't see that the light of the world was standing right in front of them. The prophets foretold that the Messiah would restore sight to the blind. And references Isaiah 29:18, 35:5, and 42:7. When they examine the ministry of Jesus, there are more instances of the healing of blind people than any other type of miracle. There's Matthew 9:27 through 31, 12:22, 15:30 through 31, 21:14, and then there's Mark 8:22 through 26, 10:46 through 52, and Luke 7:21 through 22. What's most important to the note is that this miracle represents a highly symbolic display of Jesus' ability to cure spiritual blindness. John Newton's familiar hymn sums it up. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretched like me. I was once lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. So, I really like that song. That was a really good song. Anyways, so that was the reflection that was written, and I actually really like that. That is really nice. I think that's probably one of my favorite reflections I've read so far. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the actual notes I have for chapter 9. Jesus saw a blind man, and he was born blind. And Jesus said that it was not because of his sins or his parents' sins or whatever the sins are that he was born blind, but so that Jesus can use the works of God and reveal another miracle. So in verse 4, where it says, we must work the works of him who sent me. While it is day, night is coming when no one can work. As long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Okay, so I pointed that one out specifically because Jesus said he saw this blind man, and healed him on the Sabbath day. And he spat on the ground and made clay, putting it on his eyes and telling him to go wash. So obviously, I mean, like I said, as we previously said in other things, Jesus knows what he's doing at all times. So he obviously knew that he was going to piss off the religious leaders, and they're going to want to kill him even more. But his compassion is what drove him to do it, and as he had mentioned previously, he was born blind so that he can use him as a miracle to help try and gain more people to understand that who he really is. But as I mentioned as I was reading, he seems to do a lot of stuff on the Sabbath day. Okay. So by doing this, Jesus emphasizes two things. So the first thing he emphasizes is that God made us of clay or dirt off the ground, and Jesus was using that to give his sight back. So as mentioned in Genesis, we are made out of clay. God hand formed us out of clay, dirt. Okay. Second thing is Jesus changes this method of healing so that no one could make a formula of the methods. So the power was of God, not the actual method. So the man goes down to the pool. He washes his eye, and he comes back saying he can see. Okay. So this is simply an act of faith. He didn't question him like, why are you putting mud in my eyes? Why should I go down and wash my eyes? You just did this. No, this was an act of faith, a complete devoted of faith. He didn't question him. He just went down, washed his eyes, and he gained his sight back. So up until this point, Psalms 146:8 says that Yahweh opens the eyes of the blind, and that is proof because Yahweh, I'm pretty sure I'm saying it wrong. Yahweh is another form of God, Jesus, and that's basically proof that Jesus is Yahweh. He opens the eyes of the blind. Isaiah 35:5 is a prophecy of the Messiah, and the eyes of the blind shall be opened. I mean, it's already been previously mentioned in this little reflection too. So anyways, continuing on. So when he comes back, he's able to see these neighbors and people that used to see him. They're questioning, like, is this the man who used to sit and beg? Was he born blind? And he's trying to tell them, hey, Jesus is the one who opened my eyes. And when they did that, they brought him before the Pharisees for them to do the exact same thing, for them to question, how did you gain your sight back? So he was brought before the Pharisees because they're upset that Jesus was once again performing miracles on the Sabbath day, which that seems to be a thing by now. Y'all should be getting used to that. So as obvious as his previous ones, Jesus did a miracle on the Sabbath day with very specific intentions, probably to piss them off, probably to start all of this kind of stuff. Okay, I mean, he told that one guy to pick up his bed, the paralyzed man, on a Sabbath day. I'm pretty sure I know he did something else on a Sabbath day. I just can't remember exactly what it was at the moment. So when the ex-blind man told him how his sight was returned, the Pharisees said he was not from God because he didn't keep the Sabbath day and other traditions or prejudices. So here's a note I just made. So I said many times, Jesus didn't come to unite anyone or everyone, but to divide those who believed in him and those who didn't believe in him. And there would be two sides. There's Jesus as a sinner and should be rejected. Jesus is Messiah, and our understanding of the Sabbath law is wrong. Okay, so that is the two sides. So either he's a sinner and he should be rejected, which is what the Pharisees are kind of saying, or he is the Messiah and the law is wrong. Okay, or our understanding of the law is wrong, which I wouldn't doubt it because I don't understand a lot of things. So as you guys go through it and read it, most of the Pharisees have already kind of made up their mind about Jesus. There's like no budging, but some of them disagreed, and so they asked for opinion of the blind man. Now Jesus hadn't said anything to the blind man outside of the healing, and when asked, he said Jesus was a prophet. So they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him since he has opened your eyes?" He said, "He is a prophet." So just as mentioned in reflection, he went from saying Jesus was a prophet all the way down these line things to the fact that he is the Christ and worshipped him. Okay. So instead of saying so let me backtrack. So after saying that he was a prophet, they didn't believe him, obviously. And so instead, they said it would be easier to believe that he was not blind. So they called his parents in for questioning. I mean, obviously, his parents are going to know if he's born blind or not, if he's lying. His parents confirmed that he was their son and that he was born blind. But when asked, they told him they didn't know who healed him because of the threat of excommunication. Instead, they turned the attention back to the son by saying he was of age and apt to ask him. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it even says right. Where was it? In verse 22. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, and for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. So that means they're using their power wrong, in my opinion. They're basically saying, hey, you can't say he's the Christ, otherwise you can't come into the church anymore. You get kicked out. Go away. Boo boo. So they're using their power wrong. And first off, okay, they're saying, hey, you can't do this. You can't say this. If you do, this is gonna be the consequences. And his parents were afraid of them for that. So instead of saying what they wanted to hear or not hear, they basically turned their attention to him, saying, hey, he is of age, he's not our responsibility anymore, kind of. Go ahead and ask him for who healed him and how. Okay. So in verse 24, they're basically saying, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. Okay. So basically, they're trying to they're basically, how to explain it? Okay, that was basically a command to not give Jesus the credit, but God alone. And this man was completely unaware of who Jesus was, but just that he could see that morning, or he couldn't see that morning, but then after he saw Jesus, he spoke with him, Jesus touched his life, and that was the one thing they couldn't argue against. Now, as you can tell, as you're reading in verse 26, their tone drastically changes. It says, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And it's basically their tone. Their tone went from being questioning, kind of like really kind of confused, to harsh, demanding, impatient, and they were just trying to they were just flat out refusing to see and hear the truth that was right before their eyes. And they were desperately trying to demand an answer from an ex-blind man who has saying that this guy healed him, and they're trying to get a different answer out of him. But he was firm in his words and showed simple, profound wisdom in his back and forth debates with the Pharisees. So he basically goes on to say is that if they kept asking the same thing, they would keep getting the same answers. In turn, they both mocked him. He mocked them for rejecting Jesus by asking if he wanted to be their disciples, and then by proclaiming himself to be a disciple of Christ himself. Yeah, it says, he says, you were born in utter sin, would you teach us? And they cast him out for it. But okay, so it goes on to say the fact that one, he claimed himself to be a disciple of Christ. But one thing I wanted to mention is the fact that when he said do you also? So they didn't miss that part, okay? They kind of caught on to that real quick, okay? So when he said, do you also want to become his disciple? So they real quick basically said that they were not disciples of Jesus. They were disciples of Moses. And they said that they knew where Moses came from, that he was, that God spoke to him, but they knew neither of these when it came to Jesus. They were just kept displaying their seriously proud arrogance and their precious contempt of Jesus in general. Okay, so that was the entire point of it. The healed man who knew nothing of Jesus basically told the religious leaders that their unbelief and ignorance in the face of evidence is more of a miracle than the miraculous level of being healed. But God can't hear through sins, and the ex-blind man, points this out, and that only those who does his will is heard by him. So if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. That's from verse 33. Okay, so they were especially angry because, one, they knew he was right, and two, because they were wrong, so they said he was born in sin and kicked him out for it. Jesus heard what happened and went to find him, and he asked him an important question. Do you believe in the Son of Man? This is verse 35. Verse 35. And so the man didn't deny him in front of the religious leaders, and Jesus, who knew what it was like to be rejected, came to reveal himself to him and receive him. So when Jesus asked, and he said that he was the Son of God, the man exclaimed he believed and worshipped Jesus. Now, one thing that I want to point out is so far, let's see. In here it says, what I believe he worshipped, and he said, so in verse 38 it says that he worshipped him. Okay, in the New King James Version, which is the one unfortunately, most of my notes are based off of right now, it said that he fell down at Jesus' feet and worshipped him that way. Now, one thing I wanted to point out is no man or angel in the Bible has accepted worship, and the fact that Jesus accepted this man's worship is another piece of proof that Jesus was and is God, and he knew himself to be God. Okay, now it goes into verse 39 to say, and Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, for those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. Now, the reason why I want to point that one out is because the fact is that Jesus said he brought judgment into the world by dividing a line. Some would accept him and some would not. That was the division that he was trying to create, division between the two, who believed and who didn't believe. And those who admitted their spiritual blindness can find sight in him, but Jesus, with the false claims, will be made blind. So the Pharisees were with him when the Pharisees who were with him were confident in their own sight, and obviously they're still bound by sin, but they cannot. I just completely messed that up. Hold on, ignore that. Okay, I'm just gonna read it directly because I'm trying to word it in my own words right now. I'm not getting it. Okay, so the Pharisees who were with them were confident in their own sight and were still bound by sin, not sight. They still didn't believe in Jesus and who he was. There we go. That made more sense. I do not know why I was having such a hard time wording that. So I came up with a question. It says, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" Is a summons of commitment. Jesus dealt with this blind man differently than most. He met his physical need by first giving him his sight, then allowed him to endure persecution, and finally called him to believe. It's good to remember that God may work differently in different lives. So I wanted to point that out because, well, as you got example from this story that he healed him, sent him for persecution, then called him to believe. Now, everyone's story as to how we came to the realization that he is the Son of God, that Jesus is the Son of God, that this whole entire Bible is true, is different for everyone. Can you not, Cat? Thank you. I mean, obviously, you guys kind of heard my story enough right now by now to kind of get the idea that I went back and forth between being a Christian, pagan, and I was really kind of torn between believing and not believing. And when I first became a Christian the very first time, I was not. So, like, my story might be different from someone else's. Like, I've heard a lot of testimonies as how they became Christian, how they found out that God is the Son of, or that Jesus is the Son of God. And, well, I like this story specifically because it gives you a different insight as to how this man became a disciple of Jesus that could be different from mine. I mean, he started out as blind. I don't know what his belief was beforehand. I wasn't blind. I mean, I guess I kind of was in a sense, but I was a pagan. I was pagan for the longest time before I actually became a Christian. And even still, the first time I turned away from being pagan, it didn't go very well for me. I was hanging out with the wrong crowd of Christians. I was being pushed further and further away from being a Christian because I didn't have the good supporting Christian group around me to actually support me being to that. I wasn't called to be a Christian yet. And then I went back to being pagan. And then I turned away from being pagan again because I finally found the key answer I needed to completely devote my life to being a Christian, to actually following God and knowing who Jesus is. So I just want to leave you guys with a simple question of, do you believe in the Son of God? Do you believe Jesus is who he says he is? Which is like one of the reasons why I probably really should be trying to finish this one book here. But yeah, we don't have all this crap sitting on top of it. It's this book. Okay, I know, I've said backwards, but it says, "Who do you say that I am?" Okay, I mean, I really probably should finish this book, and it's an 8-week study, but it is literally saying, "Who do you say I am?" And one of the questions in there was, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" And it goes into all these verses and everything and points out all the different things to point across that Jesus is the Son of God and that he is the I am. So, anyways, I hope you guys got a lot out of this study, and I hope this really opens your eyes as to who the Son of God really is. And I kind of can't wait to get into the next chapter. Okay, the next chapter is the Good Shepherd, and it goes into how God and Jesus are one, and how he actually loves and cares about his disciples, all that kind of good stuff. I really can't wait to go into that one. So, as I mentioned in my previous video with Genesis 1, I will only be doing John 10 next week. I will not be doing a Genesis video because I did a Genesis 10 video in my last one because it was a genealogy. However, I might do a Matthew study instead. It would be Matthew 3, but I might do a Matthew video instead, just to kind of give 2 videos instead of just 1 next week. But yes, so like I said, can't wait to do the next video, and I will see you guys next week. You guys have a great weekend.